Today marks my 100th writing advice article for MetaStellar magazine. On this milestone day, I want to do something a little different for you. Usually, I pop into your inbox or onto your screen, talk at you for several minutes about a specific topic, and depart until the next week. Today, though, I'm not going to do nearly as much talking as usual. Instead, I've invited two guests, two MetaStellar published authors whose stories will appear in the Best of MetaStellar Year 4 anthology. Two published authors who put their pens where their goals are and write. Before we get to the interviews, recently, I became MetaStellar Magazine's managing editor, and I'm really excited to serve MetaStellar authors and readers in a new capacity. But as any change may be, this shift in responsibilities is bittersweet. If you're an editor focused on development and language, and you'd like a chance to pen the next 100 writing advice articles for the MetaStellarverse, please contact me directly at the email address below. I recently connected with a new MetaStellar staff member who will be conducting and sharing interviews with published authors on a monthly basis. Grace is excited to work with our accomplished authors to share their thoughts with you, and I can't wait for interviews to become available. While we haven't worked out all the details yet, make sure you subscribe to the MetaStellar newsletter to get our On Writing column, or subscribe to the MetaStellar YouTube channel here to receive new author interviews in your feed. You saw that message correctly. The fourth MetaStellar story anthology is in process. Some shops already have pre-order links available, and other shops will soon have our newest book. Make sure you sign up for the MetaStellar Reader newsletter for publishing news and to get your copy of the Best of MetaStellar Year 4 anthology. We're getting ready to create and launch new MetaStellar merch, and we'd love to hear from you. Email me directly at the email on the bottom and let me know what kind of merch trips your trigger. T-shirts, journals, coffee mugs, water bottles, mouse pads, a human kidney. I kid. If there's a specific item you'd love to have, or if there's a specific hand-drawn writing advice image, hint, hint, you'd love turned into a piece of merch, remember, ask and you shall receive. You know, I said I wasn't going to talk at you so much this week, yet here I am gabbing away. Time to move beyond these announcements and get to the interviews. So folks, I am here with Austin Roberts. Austin Roberts holds both an MFA and an MBA, skill sets he describes as being made largely irrelevant by the Industrial Revolution, though storytelling itself is a timeless human art form. Austin's stories have appeared in 3 fiction anthologies, and one story, Some Kind of Angel, was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. When he's not writing, Austin practices swordsmanship, lockpicking, and blade and axe forging, and may teach his son skills that inevitably result in calls home from concerned teachers. You may find Austin's published work and more at austincharlesroberts.com. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Austin's work, MetaStellar Magazine published a reprint of The Fool's Fiddle in April 2024, and his story will appear in the MetaStellar Year 4 anthology. Please welcome the bard himself, Austin Roberts. Austin, thank you so much for being here today to talk about storytelling.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful to be here.
So first, The Fool's Fiddle is such an entertaining story. One so good that it's been published twice already, and it's about to come out again. The story made me think of the book 1001 Nights, how the Fiddler's Tale could have very easily slid into a collection like that. And I found myself thinking, where did the inspiration for this story come from?
So I am a major fan of heist films, like so Guy Ritchie and other such things. And so I was told there was a submission ending about 4 days before I was told about the submission period. And a friend said, "Hey, write a heist story." And so I sat down and just, it kind of came out. Sometimes characters, um, they kind of give birth in your head and they just want to talk and they want to speak. And so it came from the love of those films and other such literature and the absolute need to write a story in like 3 days and still have it edited on time.
Yeah, it's fun how the sometimes that forced deadline really pushes us to produce quality work right out of the gate. There is no time to hem and haw and get all into our anxieties about where the story should go or what it should be. It just needs to be, period. I love that. I love that you were able to really come out with such a detailed and interesting story in such a short amount of time because the Fool's Fiddle is not flash fiction. It's a much longer piece. So it's so cool to see how fast it came together for you.
And
And
to
this
be
was,
clear,
yeah,
not every story that happens with though. So
sure.
some stories are 6 months or a year working on. Sometimes when that voice just hits and everything connects, the stars align. So, um,
Yeah, it sounds like this was the right story for you at exactly the right time, and it flowed. That's excellent. I'm here today with Dennis Malsby, who is a veteran and a retired bank president living in Bloomington, Minnesota, with his wife Ruth, who's a retired legal secretary, and he says he writes because he needs the therapy. Dennis's poetry and short stories have appeared in numerous journals, including Starline, the North American Review, Haiku Journal, Spillway, the Hawaii Pacific Review, and Briarcliff Review, the submission of which was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Dennis's award-winning books include 3 collections of poetry, 2 volumes of short stories, and a novel. Several of his poems have been published online and in international print journals. He's also a past president of the Iowa Poetry Association, and he currently holds memberships with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, Iowa Poetry Association, the National Federation of State Poetry Societies, the Military Writers Society of America, the League of Minnesota Poets, and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. When he's not writing, encourages other veterans to practice creative arts to process their experiences on and after returning home from killing fields. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Dennis's work, MetaStellar magazine published a reprint of Betty and the Demon in November 2023, and his story will appear in the MetaStellar Year 4 anthology. Please welcome the prolific poet himself, Dennis Malsby. Dennis, thank you so much for being with me today to talk storytelling.
Well, Fallon, thank you for publishing my work. I appreciate it.
I loved Betty and the Demon. I'm going to say it out loud. It was so entertaining, if not slightly terrifying. And I have a deep soft spot for Betty Boop, who I, see as one of the original feminist TV icons. Your story also is coming at an interesting time in culture when many people are debating the ethics of artificial intelligence, which is a popular topic and has been in science fiction for obvious reasons.
Well, I always liked Betty Boop, like you said. And I grew up at a time when we actually could see her cartoons on television. So we went through the whole business with them. Plus, it occurred to me when reading all about AI one of the things that came to mind was Isaac Asimov's quotation, where he said, "We are creating the creature that will supplant us, and I just hope that they treat us better than we treated the ones we supplanted." So that was kind of that little quote from Asimov was kind of what got me started. And of course, the question is that the story poses at the end is we make these AI become so aware and so human, do they actually acquire a soul as well? I don't answer that question, but that's one of the questions.
It sort of speaks to the existential nature of man, what makes a human truly human, what makes us tick, what separates us from the animals. And I think science fiction does an amazing job of unpacking those big existential questions in an entertaining way with monsters and creatures and interesting tech and all kinds of stuff that we can, just sort of come from fantasy, but are backed by some of the awesome discoveries that people have made, the innovations, the inventions, other things. It's so cool to see. And The Fool's Fiddle wasn't your first published story. You've been doing this for some time. When you're thinking about your publishing history, do you have a personal favorite? I guess whether it's been published already or something you're still working on or something you hope will get published later, do you have a favorite story that you've ever written?
Yeah. I have a middle grade reader, a young adult novel, um, called The Summer I Saved the World, which is it's my passion project for the last like 3 years. I wrote it because my son hates to read. And so as a writer with a child who hates reading, I was like, okay, what can I do to get this kid involved and grab him? And so I wrote that for him, and he's the protagonist, and I absolutely love it. And it's also the story of mine that's progressing the furthest, even though nobody's seen it. So I just actually signed a TV option for the story about 6 months ago. So we've been developing a TV show off of an unpublished novel, which is a kind of an exciting thing. Um,
Yeah, that's really exciting. It's way more than I had expected you to say about that. How
yeah.
cool. So no one's even seen the story yet. Your son knows that you're writing it. I'm sure, and it's being optioned for television. How much do you get to participate in that creative process, changing sort of the novel medium into a TV medium?
So I'm a screenwriter by trade. So that's what my MFA is in. And I've worked in screen for much longer than I have in short film or short fiction or long fiction. And so I wrote the pilot. So I wrote the pilot, did the pitch, did all the pitch decks and all of the work to get that in front
Nice.
of production companies to be interested in it. So it's a very different, but also with the screenwriting, you can see that influence in Fool's Fiddle, um, because it is built on scenes, it's built on story structure and movie structure rather than necessarily literary structure.
Yeah, the story really does allow for a cinematic view, even though there's a lot of character building. It's very visual. The story itself is very visual. Betty and the Demon was not your first published piece by far. I mean, this short story was previously published in your collection of short stories, Winterset, back in 2019, and three of your books have won awards from the Military Writers Society of America. And Heart Songs won two awards. It also won the American Fiction Awards. And I'm looking at this publishing history and wondering, is there any one story that stands out to you as a personal favorite?
Yes, in fact, the very first story in the book, Winterset, was is my favorite, and it's interesting how the book originated and the story originated. The story came first, and then I liked the story so well, I decided to write other stories and get a whole chain of them going. But the reason I wrote that first story is I have some friends that have a ranch and they have horses, and one of the horses bit the guy and peeled off a strip of skin on one of his arms. He's of course is healed now. So,
Sure.
but so I saw he was recounting that, and I said, "Guys, maybe that horse was a puka, which is an Irish demon, and it's bit you, and now maybe you'll turn into a puka." So I wrote the first story about the puka, and again, it was such a delight to write that it led into these other stories. Now there's 14 stories total.
So, I mean, you say that your MFA and your MBA are largely irrelevant, but you just proved yourself wrong because you were able to directly use those skills to market your services and build a TV pitch deck, which very many people would not even attempt to do. So that's so cool. That's such a cool companion to the fiction writing work that you're doing already. Or maybe it's the fiction as a companion to the screenwriting work that you've been doing for some time. It's interesting to think about, who you are as a person, the training that you've done, and then sort of your transformation into the fiction space. There's a personal thread in that narrative, something about like who you are as a human being carrying through your work and your hobbies and your passions and all the things. And, I think about how fiction has such a way of connecting people to what they really feel, has a way of helping us put our words and language out of current events and into really base philosophies that help describe who we are, what we think, what we want, our ideals, our fears, all of the things that make us painfully and beautifully human. And when you think about the stories that you've shared, either the fiction or projects that you've participated in the creative world, do you have a broad stroke personal philosophy that you find yourself sharing over and over, that you find yourself weaving into the stories that you put together?
Yes and no. So, personal philosophy, um, I'm very much a fan of Marcus Aurelius and the original Stoicism.
Sure.
Um, and so oftentimes I believe that falls into stories and kind of falls into the characters themselves and how they interact with the world. That would probably be the closest I have to a personal philosophy. Yeah, it's mostly when I write, it isn't necessarily trying to put in my own philosophy or ideas into it. It's just trying to write a fun story.
Hmm.
So I get yelled at in a lot of writers groups. So
Okay.
when people are like, "What is the theme of your story?" I don't follow theme generally,
Sure.
uh,
Okay.
and so I write what's fun and what makes it has to make me laugh, and I have to be engaged with it. And if as long as I get that, and I get a couple of chuckles from readers, that's really what I work towards.
I've had this conversation before, the focus, especially in academia, on theme and needing to have a theme for everything and needing to be able to sum up all of the story in a single sentence that communicates this broad stroke message. And sometimes that's not the case. And sometimes a reader may do that using their perspective, their encountering of a work, but the author themselves may not have had theme in mind. Their goal may have been to tell an entertaining story, period. And that's okay. That's a wonderful thing. Still, you talked about stoicism, and I saw sort of in the story as you were, explaining where those personal philosophies came from. I mean, stoicism is all about um, keeping in your purview what you can control and releasing what's outside of your control. And I think your fiddler is an exemplary part of that. I mean, that character took, all of the tricks that he had in his own bag and used them to outsmart a dragon because he, can't control the dragon's behavior, can't control whether the dragon's being truthful, can't control, X, Y, or Z, but I can control my own relationships and I can plan for this thing that's happening, sort of in the background with Shay. So, I think, despite the fact that you may not have encountered the story with theme in mind first, I'm writing the story to communicate X. You end up communicating X by sheer virtue of being a human being with your own perspective and principles and background and values, and you're telling a story with all of those things in mind. I don't know that humans can get away from theme generally.
Oh,
We're
we we
we're
we absolutely
masters
are.
of hammering meaning out of stuff.
I believe it was Greg Hurwitz, the incredible author of the Orphan X series, amongst loads of others. Said that when he writes a story, he's not just writing one story; he's writing a million stories because everyone who reads it is going to approach that work in a very different way and pull different things out of it.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. Theme is absolutely unavoidable within story. It's just we all tend to find our own and the things that are important to us in them.
Yes. You talked about, in a couple of different ways about the evolution of a writer, starting in one place, learning and growing and testing yourself and publishing and moving and sort of learning more and keeping up on progress and changing your stories as you go. Lots of fiction authors, poets, writers generally express their personal philosophies through the stories that they share, whether or not that's intentional. Sometimes the personal philosophy comes out just because that's the nature of who we are. Sometimes it's because we focused on the theme and we wrote a story to match that theme. I would love to hear about, when you're thinking about your publishing history, the broad messages that you have shared in the stories and poetry that you've written. Is there any single broad message that you wish to share with your readers through your storytelling?
At heart, I'm basically a war poet. And that shows up in a lot of my work. I mean, I've tried to write some things that don't deal directly with war or conflict, so that if I publish a book of poetry, I don't drive you crazy trying to read 80 or 90 war poems. There's got to be some. You got to let the reader down a bit here and there.
Sure.
But I write war poetry, and I inject war scenes into my prose because I want the reader to know what it's really like. Not the Hollywood version.
Yes.
Hollywood version is way, way off. It's nothing like that. And there's a few movies maybe that have come kind of close, but it's not. They're not there. And I try to do that through poetry and through prose, and because I want the people to know. We don't want to go through wars. And the veterans come back and they know what war is like, and so we don't get into a war until they die off and everybody thinks, here we go, glory days, we're going to have another war, isn't it wonderful? And then the next group of veterans come back, and they know that that's not right, and until they pass away or lose their voices, that people are going to want to go to war again. I mean, is it human nature? I don't know. But I'd like to make sure that when people read my stuff, they get a taste of that. That here is what it's really like. It's not what you think it is.
And speaking of finding things that are important to you, and putting those in your stories, what I find so interesting is that your stories reflect your hobbies. Your hobbies reflect your stories on some level. You sort of live a sword and sorcery life, in a modern way, and I love that. The swordsmanship, the forging, lock picking. I mean, all of these are ancient technologies that are just wonderful and still in use today, and gaining popularity, because of modern TV shows like Forged in Fire, which brought a whole new cohort of people in to even understand what this art form really is, how much hard work it is, where, you can buy a set of kitchen knives, never giving a thought to how much, physical time and energy went into crafting a piece, like a tool like that. So I guess I'm curious, what influences which more? Is it the stories that influence your hobbies? Is it your hobbies that influence your stories? Or do you not separate the two, as part of your whole person?
So the answer is yes. So a lot of what I learn, I want to write it properly. I want to write it well, because there are so many times that I've read a novel or read something, and I know they didn't do it accurately, or it's a disconnect. Or usually in TV shows or in movies, you see someone lockpick and they put it in quick, and then the job's done. And I like to be able to write authentically on the things that I'm writing, and so a lot of that kind of feeds into the writing. I'm an obsessive compulsive insomniac, so I sleep like 3 hours a night.
Oh,
And so I've learned to focus that into all the different hobbies and the learning. And then all of those also become jobs. So built custom humidors for a while, and I do a lot of custom leather work for knives and firearms and that kind of thing. And usually that starts as, hey, I'd love to write a character who, fill in the blank. And then I do a deep dive into books and videos, and I find professionals, and so it all influences itself.
sure.
And so the more I learn about a subject, the more I like to put it into the writing. And the more I put it into the writing, the more I want to learn it. But then also I have a 12-year-old son who was just staring at me from my office door for like 5 seconds. And he sees me doing these things, and he's like, "Hey, Dad, why don't we, again, fill in the blank?" So I homeschooled him for a couple of years. And one of the things, we were reading The Three Musketeers, and he's like, "Dad, we need to sword fight." And so I had all the fencing gear in the attic, and so we pulled it down, and the next day we're out on the lawn doing that. And then the next night he's like, Dad, we need armor. And so we built a machine to
Nice.
make chainmail, and we spent hours, him and I, sitting on the floor weaving chainmail. Or so it goes from stories to the to hobbies to my son being like, "Hey, we need to try this," and me being a big kid myself. We do it when we have fun, and then it transfers again into the writing and into story.
Being a parent myself, I think you hit on something important that you really can't separate yourself from the way that you teach your children. And you can't separate the way that you teach your children from the things that you do for yourself. It all becomes one and the same. It's that weird transformation we go through when we become parents. Suddenly everything is different and we're living differently than we were before. I love the trajectory, starting with poetry and then working into short fiction and then working into a novel. What do if you think about your publishing future, do you have a sense on any specific medium you might prioritize? You think you'll continue to prioritize poetry, or are you putting more thought into novel writing? I'd love to hear about that.
Well, their poetry is always evolving, much more probably than anything else. And as an example, we can take the Japanese haiku. It's a very short poem, usually 3 lines, and it constantly evolves into something else. And especially in America, because we take things from other countries and we make it our own, which is why, Mexican people will say, no, you're not eating Mexican food, that's American food, even though it looks Mexican. Or Chinese, that's not, it's not real Chinese food, but we've Americanized it. And we've done the same thing with a lot of poetry forms and writing. And one of the latest things that's kind of neat is taking the haiku and making it cross-genre. So you can have horror coup, you can have fantasy coup, you can have sci-fi coup. And so, developing that and, trying to merge some skills and experience that you have. If you've been writing science fiction or horror or fantasy, you can also write poetry, in those same genres now, especially haiku.
You talked about being obsessive and compulsive and not sleeping a lot, and translating that, not sleeping time into hobbies and learning activities and work, and really investigating sort of different sides of yourself and what you want to do. Um, how does the writing process fit into this? What does that process look like for you? How do you get those words out?
Um, in exactly the same way. Sleep deprived manic typing. No, so I approach writing as a job. So I write at this point I'm writing 5 to 7 hours a day.
Okay.
Um, I set goals for myself in my writing. So I'll be like, so right now my soft goal is 1,000 words a day. My actual goal is 2,000, and then my stretch is 3,000 words a day. Most days I hit all of those goals and go beyond. But that's butt in chair, hands on keys, pushing forward with writing.
Hearing the origin stories and the thought process that generate, you started with one small story and it blossomed into an entire collection. I mean, you've done some great things in the writing world. You've been in numerous journals. You were nominated for the Pushcart Prize, which I mentioned, and you've done all of this while being internationally published. And I'm in awe of this process, this practice that you have. How do you maintain a writing practice that allows you to do so much? What does your day to day look like?
Well, of course, a lot of people look at a writer, or especially some of our younger poets, and say, "Oh, his or her writing is like a meteorite across the sky." Well, usually that's not the case. Usually there's a lot of work behind the scenes that started years ago, and nobody sees that. All they see is, when your writing gets published and you acquire some readers. So the same way with me, I've been working on first poetry because I wanted to be able to master that and take the emotion and color of and imagery of poetry and bring it into short stories. And I started short stories. And of course, I wanted to take the prose capabilities of short stories and bring it into a novel, which I've done. So, it depends on what your plan is and what drives you. And of course, you mentioned what drives me is that I need to write for therapy. So I'm always writing or looking for something to write or looking for ideas that I can generate into writing. But it started about 23 years ago. So this is not just something that popped up out of like a jack in the box. It's taken long hours of preparation and building up a body of work, and then getting some of that published. So you had the affirmation of being published, and then realize that maybe there's some value there because some editor thought there was.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So and I would say the same thing with people that are looking to start or work their careers or work their hobbies in writing, is that it takes a while, and you need to be determined. You need to know what drives you, and use that impulse, that energy to write. 10 or 15 years ago, there was an article in Scientific American called "How to Be Expert at Anything." And the writers had examined the lives and the training and the education of chess masters, which is what they use as their basis. And they said, well, first of all, it takes about 10 years. And during that 10-year period, the chess master or the writer or whoever it is that wants to be expert has got to really push themselves, constantly push themselves at the next level. And you cannot stop. They said that's why we have a lot of bad golfers, is because they get up to a certain point and they don't want to go any further. So, but I would pass that on. It seemed to me that that's right. It takes you a while to build up your portfolio, to learn. You can have great ideas, but unless you have the ability to write, you can't communicate those ideas. Yeah. So you've got to learn how to be the artist, how to bring those ideas into fruition in writing, whether it's prose or poetry or whatever it is you're writing. And it takes a while, but you got to keep plugging at it. You got to keep pushing yourself.
Everyone has a different process and a different approach to it. But for myself, I've had to cement in my mind, I actually have it written on a poster that you can't see on the other side of my office here. Only writing is writing. And so a lot of days I'd sit down and I'll do research for 7 or 8 hours because I love research.
Mm-hmm.
My undergraduate degree was in history, so I love diving into these things. But at the end of the day, I still have to tell myself I haven't written. And so it's just getting words down. So a lot of that process is very brief outlines.
Sure.
I don't do very detailed outlines. I do signposting. Because if I outline too much, I find the story bores me and I want to move to the next thing. It no longer engages me.
Sure.
And so I start with a very brief outline, kind of, I know the beginning, I know the end, I kind of fight my way through the middle. And then it's just words out on the page and the constant battle of the writing. The hardest part of writing is writing, which is a weird thing to say, but so many people have awesome ideas. And awesome ideas are great, and having stories in us is so good, but it's also important for us to get those out so people can see them and read them.
Yes.
Because if we're not writing them down, they're not stories yet.
Yeah. I also see it as making space for new stories. If we
Absolutely.
take that story and get it out, we don't have to think about it anymore. We're not processing that story over and over and thinking about all of the ways that the plot might intersect with the character arc, or all of the stuff. Instead, we can move on to the next character. Listen for the next voice, see the next place that we're going to be, start to smell that atmosphere and what that's going to look like. So I love that. That sort of acknowledgement that writing is writing, period. It's one of the things that I've talked to many new authors who are like, well, I'm doing all the stuff. I'm researching cover design. I'm looking at my marketing strategy. Hold up. Have you written anything? Anything at all? Because if
That
you
stuff's
haven't written a
important.
story, there's no cover to design.
Yeah.
So thinking ahead at all of the work you're going to do later is a really nice way to procrastinate not doing the work today. And that's the thing that keeps coming up is you've got to put your butt in the chair, and you're doing that consistently. You have a process where it's 7 hours a day. And you mentioned, doing other things for work around this. When you think about, your writing work, that's a full-time day for lots of people. 7 hours is a long day. How do you manage the many hats that you wear while you're sort of designing this life that works for you?
Um, it's the writing is first. The writing comes first always. No,
Okay.
that's not true. My family and son come first. I have to say that out loud. But the writing comes first. Um, and so everything else is built around that at this point. So I've structured my life so that I can do that. Um, but even when I'm not in the seat, so often when I go to the workshop or I take Og out and we go do a hike or do something in the woods. Um, I take the times where I find that block where I can't write forward. And I'm like, okay, well, I need to distract myself. And so I distract myself by going and, learning something more or doing something with him and kind of building new experiences. Because so much of writing is writing on those experiences that we have. And so if we don't go out and do things and experience things, um, it limits our ability. And so I've taught writing for many, many years. And I always tell my students to find a physical hobby. Because if you're painting or if it's whittling or spoon carving, whatever it happens to be, because with writing, when we sit down at our desk and we write 1,000 words and we stand up, it's still just words on a page. And it's hard to show people that, it's hard to engage with it. Where having if you've just carved a spoon, you can take that and now eat soup with it, and you have a completed piece. And having some kind of completion is important in order to continue the battle of the writing. Because novels and stories, some take years to write. I have a story that's always open on my computer that I've been writing for 6 years. And it's a short story. It isn't like
Okay.
this massive thing. But so it's important for writers to find something that they can do that also has a completionist aspect to it.
You said your writing history started 23 years ago, and your book was published 2017, the first one. I may be getting that date wrong, but that's
2015.
2015. So there's a big gap between 13 years from when your writing career started and when you saw your first piece published. During that time, it sounds like you just refused to give up on writing and processing and moving forward and learning new things and changing your storytelling medium, and really just kept up on what it meant to live the lifestyle of a writer. You wanted to be a prolific writer, and so you went for it and you did the things that you needed to do to become prolific in your writing. Beyond, doing it and finding the thing, the impetus that makes you want to write and keep up on writing. Is there any specific practice you use each day that helps you get words on the page or helps you get focused and in the moment for the piece that you're working on?
Yes, there's been some studies done on when people are the most creative. And usually, from where most people, is between about 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. in the morning. And so that's when I try to do my creative writing. Now, there's a little bloop after lunch that you get for about an hour and a half that's not quite as good as the morning. And I use that time for research.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to be creative there. I'm just trying to, accumulate the facts, accumulate the materials and the ideas so that I can use that tomorrow morning when the most creative time comes up again.
Which feeds to your earlier answer about writing a lot and also learning a lot and balancing those two on a constant basis, as part of the growth of the writer.
And I wouldn't
Um,
be afraid to go back to school a bit too. One of the things I did my first 10 years of trying to accumulate skills and abilities was to attend summer sessions at the University of Iowa. They have a program there called the Iowa Summer Writing Festival. And you can go for a couple of days, you can go for a week or 2 weeks, and they have all different kinds of topics, whether it's poetry, whether it's developing characters, for prose writing, whether it's science fiction, plays, anything. You can attend those. I went for 7 years, and the first couple of years was poetry. Another couple of years was short stories, and then the last year or two was novels. So I was trying to follow the path that I wanted to develop my writing. The other thing is I've tried to see how movies and plays interact with what I'm writing. I went back to community college here and took a semester course in movie scripts and playwriting. And so I've got two 10-minute demo scripts and a 10-minute play that I've used and I've written. And when you go into those, you start looking at a lot of things that can cross into your writing. For example, look at all the staff that movies and plays have to put them together. There's somebody that deals with lighting. So in the same way with your prose, you have a scene. Well, what's the lighting in the scene? You can look at it through kind of your movie mind in order to enhance, what you're writing in prose or in poetry. Sound, costumes, all this kind of stuff that movies have to go through and playwrights, have to go through. You can also use those, look through those eyes at your writing and see if you're doing that the same.
I noticed that in some of the very plain and frankly gross language that you use to display, what the bodies looked like. And I think it's important to strip away the romance of war, because that's what a lot of it is, right? We have war stories of today, but they're not, from the American perspective, most of the people in the country have never been involved in direct conflict. There is a distance between what you see shared on TV versus the experience of the people actually going through this, actually participating in a war. When you think about, the conflict that you've dealt with as a veteran, the poetry, the short stories, the novel that you're writing that deals with some of these heavier themes of conflict, I almost never talk to a writer who doesn't read. And so I'm wondering, while all of that was going on for you, were you reading books that influenced you, that sort of kept you grounded and able to move forward and process all of those things while you were writing? Do you have big literary influences that helped you through, specific periods in your life where you were dealing with heavy conflict?
I think in the war poetry especially, I went back to World War One with some of the World War I poets that had written things that I could identify with right off. There's other veterans that have come back and written and had military things in their poetry and in their short stories. I'm trying to think of Joseph Kumanyaka, for example. If you would look up him, he was a Vietnam poet, probably one of the best. And one of his best poems that really got to me was he describes a woman coming to the Vietnam Memorial, and she's taking a rubbing of a name off, like they do there. They put up a piece of paper and rub with a pencil and they get a name off of it. And in his mind, he sees her combing the hair of a boy.
Yeah, it's a powerful visual. For a lot of reasons, but to see the person behind the headstone, I think it's easy to forget that there were real human beings who are interred.
And, a lot of people don't understand it. They pick up on that image, I think. But, for example, let's see, who is the writer of Franny and Zoe? I'm trying to remember his name. At any rate, he was in World War II, and actually was in a unit that was one of the first units to go into the concentration camps and find out what they really were like. And one of his short stories, he writes about a veteran coming back, and the mother of his wife and his wife are talking about the veteran, and they can't understand why he gets nervous when he sees trees. And I knew right away what he was talking about. It's the tree lines. That's where all the ambushes come from. But we dissected that in one of these classes that I went to at University of Iowa, and people didn't understand what that was. And so there's the draft is gone. The huge, like you said, the huge majority of people don't have any military experience. The veterans from World War I, World War II, Korea, they're going. A lot of the Vietnam veterans are going. They don't have that. There's no institutional, memory. That we're wiping that out, and so they don't know. They have no idea what it's like. And even if you write about it, a lot of times they will not understand what it is.
You talked about having a manuscript that's been open for years that you sort of pecking away at here and there. How many stories are you working on during a day, during the 7-hour writing stretch where you're, getting out anywhere from 1,000 to 300 or 3,000 words or more? What is that? How many projects are you touching in that time?
So right now it's 3 projects.
Okay.
So it's the next novel, which is almost done, which is a middle grade retelling of Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett,
Okay.
with dodgeballs instead of gangs. And so it makes me giggle. I'm developing, and then I'm developing 2 other television shows right now.
Okay.
And so in different genres and different, areas. And so I have those 3 that I'm focused on as new writing. But then I also have the editing projects. So if I don't have something to write new, I go to a project I need to edit,
Okay.
and then I edit on that, and then I come back. And so I try to keep it, I try not to do 2 or more of the same project. So like writing 2 novels at a time would be too much.
Sure.
But writing a novel and a short story and a TV show are different games entirely.
Flash fiction at 1,000 words has a very different commitment than an 80,000 word novel, or more, as some novels are. You have to. When you have those ideas and you've got projects that you're working on, how do you manage those projects and keep them all progressing? How do you manage to avoid letting one stagnate for an inappropriate amount of time?
I don't.
Okay.
I have to be honest. No, so I write what's flowing, which is why I have the couple of things going, because I don't
Okay.
ever want to sit down and say I have to be writing and not be writing.
Sure.
And so if one of those projects is working well, so the novel, I will be finishing it this week. It's been a 2-month project. Again, it's
Okay.
middle grade reader, so it's short.
Yep.
It's 35,000 words. That is all I have worked on for the last month. And then before that, I just did one of the TV shows, and got that out to my manager and agent. And then now I'm building the next one, because I'm trying to build momentum in multiple avenues of writing. And so trying to build momentum with both short stories, novels, and film. Sometimes it requires over specific focus depending on what my manager's looking for,
Yeah.
or what I need to, what deadline's coming up the fastest.
I'm curious about, in all of this and all of the writing that you're doing, and sort of the meaning that you're excavating out of your stories, whether they're in, fiction form or poetry form. When you do have those ideas for the next piece that you're going to put together, where do those ideas typically come from, and how do you manage them? How do you choose, which piece to work on at any given time?
Well, one example was what I mentioned earlier, the friend that got bitten by his horse.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an idea, and then I thought, yeah, maybe what if there really was an Irish demon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the town that he lives just outside of Winterset. So I went ahead and said, hey, let's set it in Winterset. And of course, that's Madison County, somewhat
Mm-hmm.
famous for the bridges of Madison County, and then the Clint Eastwood movie, that was filmed in Madison County. So that set me off. Well, then I thought, maybe I can do some more of these stories. So I started research, and I went to the census data on Madison County. In that data, people listed where their ancestors came from. And of course, we immigrants bring our demons with us, when we go places. And so I went, there were Irish that had settled there. So here's a puka, which is a ship-shifting Irish demon. There's a leprechaun in one of the stories. There's Norwegians, so there's a troll. And of course, trolls love Madison County because they can get under all those bridges, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there were Mexican laborers there that came in to work the fields, and so the old Aztec gods show up and do some damage, you know, and so on, you know. So I could go through all of those different immigrant groups and pull out their mythology, something from their mythology, and write a story about it. So that's how it developed, you know. And that book actually is one of my bestsellers. So,
Excellent.
but the other side of it is I get ideas. Of course, I write them down. You know, at least an outline, and then I may not get back to them for months or whatever. But at least I've got the outline there that reminds me what I was thinking at the time. And but you've got this old kettle here, you know, that's boiling all the time. And sometimes it hooks on one of the ideas and I can't get it out of my head. You know, I even have dreams about it. So the brain starts to develop the story and the characters. And all I need to do is write it down. I don't know whether it's the subconscious or whatever it is. It's just causing that. But, you know, a lot of the work is done. I'm in my mind when I'm actually doing something else, or maybe at night when I'm sleeping, you know, the brain continues to work, continues to develop the ideas.
To make the focus of your writing life, or to make writing your sort of central focus, did you need to sort of prioritize that first and just do it? Or did it come naturally after you were writing more and sort of things transformed on their own? You know, how forced was that transition to, you know, a 7-hour writing workday?
100% forced.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
it takes. I mean, I've been doing that. I'm now writing full time, I believe, for 7 months now, 8 months now. Um, and it was very much forced, and it took a lot of engagement, especially with my family and like that conversation with my wife. Hey, I'm doing this. And she's incredibly supportive and just said it's about time. And so she basically told me I was an idiot for having not done it before. And so um, yeah, so it was very much forced. It's very much a battle every day because there is that, you know, as artists and as writers, when we have internal struggle and turmoil, at least for myself, it's harder to get words on the page.
Hmm.
And so sitting here writing, thinking, oh, I should be at a desk job, hating my life right now, but I'm actually having fun and I'm at home. Um, it took my wife basically, you know, smacking me aside the head and saying, no, this is who you are. You're a writer, you're a storyteller. Stop pretending you're something else.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us as writers to face that and really engage in who we are and what we are, and then follow that. Because it's hard to come home after an 8-hour day, make dinner, do family time, and then sit down at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock and actually get productive word count out.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that I can't. You know,
Yeah.
I am functionally useless after 9 p.m. You know, my daughter's only 7. She still wakes me up at, you know, by 7 o'clock in the morning. There is no, you know, I used to be my early 20s, one of those people who could start at midnight and write until 4 o'clock in the morning. And that was my sweet spot. The rest of the world is sleeping and my ideas are wide awake. I can't do that anymore. That time's been taken from me by the joy of
And it's not
motherhood.
sustainable.
It's not
It's
sustainable.
not sustainable.
No, it's not.
I
We need
mean,
sunlight. We're animals on a planet. We need to, you know, sort of live within a reasonable circadian rhythm so that we don't
yeah.
fester and, you know, become totally washed out and sickly. You know, so it's, you know,
Sure.
we have to have a, you know, a functional lifestyle rhythm. I love that you said that it was 100% forced. This isn't a lifestyle that just fell into your lap. It wasn't just you woke up one luxurious morning and realized, oh, I have all this time to write. No, no, no. You made this happen for yourself because it's who you are. It's what you needed to do. It's how you feel good about yourself. And I think on some level, maybe it's, you know, modern society, whatever amorphous term you want to use, but there's you know, sort of a devaluation of the arts that's been happening. And what I'm seeing more and more over the last couple of years is that the the artists themselves are radically taking control of what it means to be an artist and who to live an artist lifestyle and are championing the value of art, because while streaming services want everything to be free for everyone all the time, artists know the work and the blood and the time and the tears and the sweat and the missed holidays and the missed everything that comes with the creation of artwork, and how many people don't see the value because they have instant access to everything all the time, but what would happen if all of the television streaming went away and all of the movie streaming went away and all of the music streaming went away? I mean, we would become husks of our creative selves. So I love that you are taking that stance and just pushing forward and being the writer that you are, because it's important. It's important for humanity. It's important for all of us collectively to feel good about ourselves, having access to the arts and the artists who create that artwork. I would love to know if you have any major literary influences or favorite works that you think would be helpful for others to read, books that lit up your passion fires or that made you feel something, or books that you come back to over and over just because they matter that much.
I absolutely do. But I like to preface this a little bit is that I am mocked often for my list because I'm very much a commercial writer. I do this and I joke that I'm mercenary, and you have to be, especially with the screenwriting and the TV shows. Um, I love my characters and I love my stories. And when an editor or a producer says we need to cut blank, be it all the magic out of, so I, let me backtrack. The novel that I sold to a TV show is about a kid who goes to camp and then fights monsters with magic and it's shenanigans. The TV show itself, the producers came back and said, you have to cut the magic and you have to cut the monsters, which was the entire freaking book. Um, and but I'm mercenary, so I said yes. And so I did it, and it's clean, it's gone, and that becomes another show. But so I look at writing as a commercial venture as much as it is an artistic venture. And so I am not a big fan of Tolkien. And all my fantasy friends, I say that, and they're like, "No, he's the best." And I'm like, "Ah, he's okay." And so my inspiration is a lot more commercial side. So Jim Butcher's Dresden Files
Okay.
is probably my favorite book series of all time. I read it every couple of years. Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, but
Hmm.
not the TV show because they
It's
did terrible
different.
things to it.
Yeah.
Um, and then and then a lot of it is movies. So I have a whole shelf of scripts over here. And so The Princess Bride I read at least once a month. The Goonies I read all of the time. The Mask of Zorro is an incredible script. Um, there are a handful of others that I very much enjoy. Um, but also comic books. So I'm a big Batman fan, and so I have a whole shelf of Batman comics that I kind of keep going back to. And so I don't. A lot of my writer friends read a lot of eclectic writers, and a lot of the people on the artsier side. Um, I'm a James Patterson, Joe Abercrombie guy.
Okay.
Um, and
Yeah.
I say that without apology because I love how fast their prose are, and how visual they are, because they really fall into that screenwriting side and that screenwriting medium. I realize I have to add one more to this list only
Hmm.
because a friend of mine who's a bookseller, Swamp Yankee, makes fun of me for always talking about Captain Corelli's Mandolin. And so he gets me copies whenever he sees them. And so because it's one of the books that I use to teach often, and so I have to put that in there just because I end up with stacks of them because of a bad joke with a friend. But it's an absolutely delicious book.
I would love to know, Dennis, what are you working on now?
Uh-huh. Well, I put together a chapbook of these sci-fi coup, horror coup kind of things,
Yes.
and that was really fun. And plus, a lot of them got published in different science fiction and horror journals. And I'm still writing some of those from time to time. And of course, still writing some military poetry. But I've actually got, let's see, 5 novels that are in various stages. And there's a trilogy, and there's a single novel that could be a trilogy, but there is a trilogy. I've got three volumes almost completed. And there's a couple of other single novels that I'm working on. And I think some of them are close enough. I've written them and modified them enough that they probably could go to a publisher for a review. So we'll just have to see how that works.
Is there anything, sort of last notes that you would like to share?
I think, it's a message I tell my students all the time is write. Like, don't be scared of the work. Don't be worried about what people are going to think about it. Don't worry about editors. Don't worry about rejections. Just get the words down. Just get it written. Or don't get it right, get it writ is what I tell them every single day and every time I work with mentors. So write your words. Get them out. It doesn't matter if one editor doesn't like them. Someone down the line will love your story no matter what it is.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Big hearts for that. I love that. I think we need more of that. We need more artistic bravery. I mean, if nobody took a chance, we'd all still be flat earthers. So, let's not do that to our
It's true.
Let's not stifle our innovation before we get a chance to express it.
Another thing I would pass on that I thought was really good was one of the years I went to the Summer Writing Festival. Mm-hmm. They had a fairly well-known poet that gave a lecture, and he talked about how he was writing and what kind of processes he went through. And he said the critics always say how spontaneous my poetry is. He says it gets real spontaneous about the 50th rewrite. So that's the other thing, your first draft, things come really alive during the rewrites, not during the first draft.
Yes.
And that's when the sweat and the blood occurs, is the rewriting. The first draft may be fun to write and trundle out of you, fairly easily. But then you get into the rewriting, and that's where the real work really starts. Yeah,
I've said before to writers that the craft of writing happens in the drafting. It's nobody is publishing their first draft because it's beautiful out of the gate. We're all starting with a mess that we're picking apart and putting back together multiple times before it feels right and we start to send it out. I think you hit on that. It really requires some persistence of the process.
I pushed stuff aside and then picked it up, weeks later or months later and said, who wrote this junk? Well, when I first wrote it, I thought it was wonderful. But part of that is that you're getting better. If you have that reaction, it means your writing's getting better. Mm-hmm. So you're able to look back and say, gee, I made a lot of progress here. This was a piece of junk, and now I can maybe write it into something better with what the knowledge and the practice and whatnot I've had in the meantime.
So tell our viewers where they can get in touch with you if they're interested in more of your work. It's AustinCharlesRoberts.com. Where else are you in the wild?
So that is the best place right now. And I'll admit it's not very well developed because I've spent so much time on the writing side. I haven't done the website as much. But very soon there's going to be videos going up on both, some blacksmithing and some projects that we're working on, as well as some articles and some other things. And so that's really the best place to go. And I'm happy to talk with people about writing at any time. It is what I do. It's what I think about. It's who I am.
I want to make sure that the readers and writers of MetaStellar can find you and keep up to date on your work and what's going on in your writing life. What is the best way for folks to get in contact with you? Is it your website, DennisMalsby.com? Do you use other social media? Do you have a newsletter? How do people find you?
I just revised my website, and so I would recommend people start there, and it's DennisMalsby.com. Very easy, as long as you spell the name right. And it's got some of my poetry has actually been set to music, which is another way you push yourself. How do you get in? That's another thing you can explore and push yourself with. And there's some free, there's a movie script out there that you can take a look at. There's all kinds of stuff. And there's lists of my books. Also on Amazon, you can get most of my books in Kindle or in print. And they're
Excellent.
all listed out in Goodreads with reviews. So I would say, just, other than my going directly to my website, you could just put my name in Google and you'll come up with, multiple hits.
Thank you, Austin, for being here, for sharing your words of wisdom, for giving some recommendations, and for encouraging the next generation of writing hopefuls who might feel afraid of releasing their words into the world. I think you've given them permission to move forward and do that which excites, even when it feels a little scary. And that's what growth as an artist, as a communicator is all about, doing the uncomfortable things to get to the sweet rewards inside. So thank you again. Please, for viewers who are unfamiliar, please go check out The Fool's Fiddle, give that story a read, look at Austin's back catalog, connect with him, and stay tuned for more wonderful stories. This has been great, Dennis. And I thank you so much for being willing to come and chat with me and share your wisdom and your process with the writers at MetaStellar. If there is one final piece of advice that you have for authors before we close the interview today, what would that be?
Uh, find out what drives you and use that energy.
Please take a moment to go find Betty and the Demon on the MetaStellar website and read that story. If you liked The Terminator, if you liked 2001: A Space Odyssey, that short story will blow your socks off. And go find Dennis and connect with him. Follow him on Amazon. Pick up his books. And yeah, let's keep writing. I hope you enjoyed these author interviews. And remember to check out the Best of MetaStellar Year 4 anthology, where you can read The Fool's Fiddle, Betty and the Demon, and lots of other great speculative fiction tales from our talented authors. And if you're an aspiring or established author in need of support, consider this your formal invitation to fly into the Novel Nest, where I offer craft advice, accountability and support, weekly group writing sprints, and a coming publishing label for self-publishing fiction authors focused on quality storytelling and building writing careers that help us achieve our creative dreams and put good into the world. More to come in this wild and crazy spec fic life, and I'm so happy to have you along for the ride. Thank you for being here. And here's a special thank you to our Patreon supporters who help keep the MetaStellar engine running. Happy writing and reading.